one last hurrah for the Space Shuttle Discovery. On Wednesday, the 27-year-old spacecraft is scheduled to make its final liftoff. During its lifetime, Discovery has carried out some of the most dramatic shuttle missions. It made NASA's return to space after both the Challenger and Columbia disasters. Now, following tomorrow's mission, there are just 2 more scheduled before the shuttle program is retired. For more now, CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood joins us from Kennedy Space Center. Bill, thanks for being with us this morning.
No, it's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
One of the things that I want to ask you about is what is planned for Discovery on this last mission?
Well, it's a very complicated flight. You know, NASA's big push right now, with just 3 flights left, is to get the International Space Station as well stocked as possible with both supplies and with spare parts. You know, the station has 6 people on board, but it takes a lot of supplies to support them. And once the shuttle fleet is retired, the station is going to be relying on much smaller Russian, Japanese, and European spacecraft to carry up those supplies. They say 1 space shuttle is equal to about 7 Russian Progress supply ships. So all 3 of these flights are very important. This particular mission is taking up the final U.S. pressurized module. It's basically a big storage container to give the station a sort of a closet to store things in, along with tons and tons of supplies and equipment and some spare radiators for the cooling system. So it's a pretty complicated mission.
It's also taking up a robot, right?
That's right, Robonaut 2. You know, this is an experimental robot. NASA designed it with the help of General Motors. It's basically a proof of concept. It looks like an upper torso of a humanoid sort of figure. It's got arms, it's got hands and fingers that articulate like humans do. And the idea is that by designing it in the humanoid form, it can use the same tools that humans can use. It can get into the same sorts of spaces. And it may someday see use both inside and outside the space station to do things that might be too hazardous for an astronaut, or maybe doesn't require all the complexity of doing a spacewalk. So it's got a lot of promise, but a long way to go before they can show that it'll actually work.
Well, after these missions are complete, what's going to happen to the 3 shuttles once the program is shelved?
Well, you know, NASA put out a solicitation a few years back telling museums across the country that these 3 shuttles were going to be available for display. One of the big sticking points is it's going to cost about $28.5 million to whichever museum wins to pay for safing the shuttle, preparing it for transport, putting it on the back of a 747 transport jet, and getting it to its destination. There was a story yesterday by a website called Collect Space that points out that the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which everyone thought was going to get Discovery, may not in fact be able to pay for it. So all that's up in the air right now. We have to wait and see. But it's going to be at least the end of this year until we find out where the 3 shuttles are going. The end of next year, I should say, before we find out where all 3 shuttles are going to end up. But they will be on display sooner or later. Yeah,
well, by that time, hopefully they have the funding to get them to those museums. You know, next week, or this week, I should say, is the 10th anniversary of the International Space Station. Once these missions are complete, where does the space station stand?
Well, you know, actually today is the 10th anniversary of permanent human occupation. There have been astronauts and cosmonauts on board the station ever since November 2nd, back in 2000. The real big question mark is, can NASA and the Russians and their partners keep the station supplied? They want to fly it through at least 2020. But like I was saying earlier, keeping 6 people supplied with all the equipment, the food, the hardware that's required is a major challenge without a big spacecraft like the shuttle. NASA's hoping that commercial providers will develop some new unmanned cargo ships that can step up to the plate and help out. But if they don't, there could be a real crunch in the 2012 timeframe, that early, where they might have to go back to having just 3 people on board if these commercial providers don't step up to the plate. So it's going to be a real challenge to keep 6 people up there. That's the goal.
Well, speaking of those commercial flights, this week Virgin's Spaceship 2 made a test glide. Do you think those commercial flights really are the future of space tourism, if you will?
Well, now, tourism and supplying the station are 2 different things, because the Virgin Galactic spacecraft doesn't go to orbit. It's a suborbital up and down flight, and it can't get to the space station or deliver supplies. What NASA is hoping for is that companies like SpaceX, which is based in Hawthorne, California, is going to be launching out of the Kennedy Space Center. Boeing and some other companies are going to come up with both manned and unmanned capsules that can carry supplies and people up to the International Space Station or other targets in low Earth orbit. Certainly the proponents of commercial spaceflight view Virgin Galactic and their manned spacecraft and all of these other endeavors is the wave of the future, to take it out of the government's hand and let private industry use efficiencies and get the cost down to where this is a more affordable endeavor. Whether they can do that on an orbital level, it's a lot more difficult to get to orbit. That remains to be seen, and I think a lot of people have questions about that, but we'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch it play out.
Would you take one of those flights?
That's a really good question. The better question is, would my wife let me take one of those flights?
CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.